G'day, Mike Rhodes from Agency Savvy here. In this video, we're going to talk about how to set goals with clients, how to make sure your clients' goals are realistic, but actually also well thought out. So we'll start with some questions that you might want to ask your client. Obviously, you're going to know before you talk to them if they're a lead gen website or if they're an e-commerce website. And I'm not going to split this video in two, but we'll talk about both as we go through because they are going to be slightly different. A question that often doesn't get asked is, where are they at in their growth stage? Are they at this point willing to grow very fast with minimal profit because they just want to get more customers, more subscribers, more sales in the door? There could be many reasons for that, and they're less concerned about profit right now. Maybe they want to hit a certain amount to get a volume bonus from a supplier. Maybe they just need to build up their reviews or ratings, and so they just need to get this great product in the hands of lots of people. They don't really care too much about profit yet. The fastest way to grow a business is at break even. Or do they need to maximize the profit on each sale? Maybe that's because they're only expecting to sell an item to a person the one time. If you're selling a garage door, people don't tend to buy those very often, and so you need to make some money on the purchase. And then, do they have a target? Do they have an idea of what they think they should be spending to acquire this customer? Now, I haven't put anything in here about mindset, but your ideal client has a mindset of investment. This is an investment in Google ads, in Facebook ads, whatever it might be, to learn over time, to get better over time. The return on that investment should get better over time. It's probably not going to be profitable week one, probably not going to be profitable month one. We just don't know, depending on where they're at, again, in their lifestyle and how much data you have to work with. But they should have a target. They should have an idea of, what am I willing to spend to get a new lead or to make a sale? Now, this tends to be a little bit woolly on the lead gen side. So we'll have so many people that will come to us and say, yep, at the moment I'm getting leads for $100, but I'd love to get them for 50. I'll spend all the money in the world if you can get them for 50. And I'm not going to talk about the profit curve in this video. That's a separate piece of work, but often we'll find that reducing CPA or cost per lead is actually the wrong thing to do. We can increase total profit by going the other way. Again, it depends on where that break-even point is. We'll talk more about that in a bit. The question that you want to ask, though, at this point is, how did they come up with that target? Where has it come from? Has it just come down from on high, from the board, or from somebody above them in the business? Has it actually been thought through? Are they just looking at year-on-year targets and saying we need to have a revenue of last year plus 20%, and then we'll take a chunk of that as our marketing budget and use that? Is it rooted in the real world? Is it realistic? And a great question to ask is this a minimum acceptable target, or is this a stretch goal? Because if this is a stretch goal and you're doing everything you can to hit it and you can't, thinking they're going to fire me, and then they turn around and say, oh, that's fine. No, as long as we get to there in 12 months, that'll be fine. I would have been good to know that up front. So you just want to have that conversation early on. So some questions that I will ask is, what is a new customer worth to your business? Now, in the real world, it's not quite this cut and dry. We are not only showing ads to people that are completely new customers. There's going to be a little bit of overlap there. They might have been to the website a few times but not be a customer yet. They might have bought a long time ago. As much as possible, we're going to try and segment that traffic, but it's not perfect. People could be on different devices. People can use ad blockers and not be tracked. There's a bunch of reasons why it's not super clean and perfect, but as much as possible, we're trying to acquire new customers for this business or trying to retain existing customers and get repeat purchases. But asking, what is a new customer worth to the business? You'll find that many business owners have never really thought about this. They want to get them for free, and they haven't really thought about investing in acquiring new customers. Do they buy once, or are you expecting this person to buy multiple times through their lifetime of dealing with you? Now, lifetime value gets thrown around a lot. I will typically shorten that. Instead of talking lifetime, I'll typically talk about, well, what revenue are you expecting over the next maybe 3 years? And if I can see they're having a problem with that, then maybe just over the next year, or even just the first 90 days. the first 90 days of someone dealing with you, what revenue are you expecting to make? And then what's the profit within that? And if they're not willing to share those numbers and to talk profit with you, then the trust probably isn't there and they're probably not going to be a great client ongoing. You need to know these numbers so that you can do the best work for them. So the first part of this, we're going to talk about some jargon. Some of these terms that get thrown around that I find some people that have been in business for a little while aren't really sure about. I think you're going to know these. These are pretty basic, but average order value, sometimes called average basket value, average sale value, but average order value, AOV, is probably the most common. Obviously more for an e-com business. Cost of goods sold, or COGS, again on the e-com business, so that's your cost per unit. So if I'm selling this thing for $3, then maybe the supermarket that sold me, their cost of goods is maybe $1 on that. And we'll talk about the difference of the different types of profit in a minute. And then overhead or expenses. What does it cost to run the business? So what's all the other cost? And we'll talk about how that breaks down between the two different types of business. Now here's where I find many marketing people, particularly in their early days, might get stuck. The difference between gross and net profit, and then also markup and margin. So gross profit is the total revenue minus the cost of goods sold. So this is, again, more used just on the e-com side. So if my revenue is $3 and my cost of goods is $1, my gross profit margin is $2. Now, to work out my gross profit percentage, then it's the margin over the revenue. In other words, the $2 divided by that original 3 or 67%. So in this example here, we've got a cost of goods of 30% and therefore a gross profit of 70%. Lead gen generally doesn't use cost of goods sold. Lead gen is just generally going to talk about revenue versus expenses or income versus expenses as per your P&L. So net profit then, or typically just profit. On the e-com side, we're going to have our net profit margin is our sales less our cost of goods less our overhead or expenses. So in this case, where's my little $100 gone? Oh, well, it's disappeared. It was meant to say $100 revenue. It doesn't matter. So if we got $100 of revenue or sales, we can use those terms interchangeably. We got a cost of goods of 30, and then in this case, we're allowing $20 as overhead for the business. So there's a number of ways people will do this. You'll hear things like fixed cost and variable cost. I'm not going to go deep into that at all today. Sometimes that will be factored in and sometimes it won't. Why might that be? Simply because often what we're helping businesses with is incremental sales. So the lights are on, everybody's paid for, the rent's paid, and then just try and get me some extra sales. My fixed costs are going to stay the same regardless of if you turn this ad campaign on or not. And so I might choose to ignore overhead in this case. If I've sold 1 million units this year and business is running, and then you come along and sell one more, then the overhead for that one more is negligible. And so then we're just looking at the revenue minus the cost of goods, and that's the profit. Sometimes overhead gets included, and then that's net profit. So on the lead gen side, so this is more like, say, my business, for $100 of income, I might have, say, $80 worth of expenses for rent, for team, for software, and so on. And that leaves my net profit of $20. And same thing, your net profit percentage is your margin divided by the sales. So in this case, 50% or 20%. Markup is the fun one. So markup is the amount that your cost needs to be increased by to get to your selling price. So if you want a 10% margin, then your markup needs to be 11.1%. If I need to get from $9 to $10, I need to increase my price from 9 to 10. That's an increase of 11.1%. My margin is the difference. So think of this as the difference and what you compare it to. So it's the difference, margin is the difference compared to the sale price. So 10, or in this case, $1 compared to $10 is 10%. Markup is the difference compared to the cost price, or the amount it cost you. $1 compared to $9 is 11.1%. Let's do another one. 25% margin. So the difference between 60 and 80, I want to get from 60 and sell for 80. So margin is the difference, $20, compared to the sale price, 80. 20 over 80 is a quarter, 25%. My markup, how do I get from 60 to 80? Well, that's the difference, the 20, over the cost, 60. So 20 over 60, 2 over 6, 1 over 3, that's a third, 33%. Let's do a couple more. 30% margin. I want to, my margin, you can see there, $30 is the difference between 70 and 100. If I compare that to the 100, that's 30%. 30 compared to 70, 43%-ish. 40%, do the maths in your head. And then the easy one, 50% margin. If I want a 50% margin and the thing costs me 200, I'm going to need to mark it up 100%. This is where people get stuck when they're trading. If you lose half of your bank when you're trading stocks, Forex, whatever you trade, you're going to have to make 100% growth in order just to get back to where you started. So if you lose 50% of your money, you have to now make 100% of what you've got to get back to where you started. Similar sort of thing here. So here's the quiz. If your sale price is 100 and your cost of goods is 40, what's the margin and what's the markup? You got 3 seconds. Your margin then is the 60, it's the gap, 60 divided by the sale price. So 60 over 100, 60%. Your margin, what's the margin if your cost of goods is 40 and your revenue is 100? Ding, 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 bow. It is the gap, 60, over the cost, 40. So 150%. You'd need to mark up by 150% to get from 40 to 100. Hopefully that is now clear. All right, so in this section, we're going to talk about lead gen businesses, and then I'll talk about retail separately because there's just slight differences. So what is a new client worth to your business? That's where we're going to start the conversation with a client. How often are they going to buy from you? We may know before we start that the average person is going to buy once, but maybe there's a lot of referrals in there. So maybe they sort of factor in, well, the average person refers another half a person on average. You know, every 2 people, we seem to get another referral. So you could factor that in to frequency. You probably want to do that as a separate piece of maths, but frequency of purchase, are they buying once or are they expected to buy over and over again? How much revenue are we expecting this person to bring in? Again, if they buy once, that's easier. And then what's the profit from that revenue? And then for lead gen, the next question I'm going to ask is, what's the sales process? How does somebody go from being unknown to being a client? What steps do you take? And I just say to them, walk me through the steps. And we'll do that beginning to end because it's much easier for them. In a second, we're going to come back the other way and ask a bunch of questions. But to begin with, what's the process? How does somebody become a client typically? I know there's a bunch of different ways that might happen, but on average, what happens? And then, very importantly, who are these people right now? Because if the people buying right now, let's say we're talking to a lawyer. I tend not to work with lawyers, but let's assume we're working with a lawyer. And they talk about, okay, the process for that. Who is it right now? Well, it's the person that's been referred from the other guy that sends me 80% of my business. Okay, well, that's good to know because when we start putting ads up and going after cold traffic, we've got to expect that these numbers are going to change, that your conversion rates, the number of people doing what you want them to do, is going to drop because these people are not as pre-sold. They don't know you, like you, trust you yet. So we need an understanding of that to help set expectations. Then, once I've got the steps, then I'll ask them to walk backwards through the steps with me and ask how many different people are needed to get one person at each step. Let me explain. Okay, so let's say this is, reading up from the bottom here, is the process. We went from a form fill on the website to a phone call to a meeting to a client. I should have put that on the slide. That would have been helpful. And then I'll ask them, okay, so to get that one client at the end, how many different people do you need to have meetings with in order to get that client? And they give me a number. Great. Now, how many different people do you need to phone in order to get that meeting? or one of those meetings, and they give me a number. Awesome. And how many people need to fill out that form on the website to get one person on the phone? So for example, if we're back to our lawyer and it's 30 grand over the next 3 years, most people only buy once, but occasionally some people come back and buy a little bit. So we're going to say 30 grand over 3 years. And within that, we've got 8 grand of profit. And the process is they come from the ad, they fill out the form on the website, we have a phone call with them, and then some of those come in and have a sit down meeting, and then some of those sign and become a client. Awesome. Thank you, dear client. Right. How many meetings does it take to get that one client? How many calls to get that one meeting, and how many form fills to get that one call? And they might say it's 3 meetings on average. We have to meet 3 different people or 3 different couples in order to get that one client. Awesome. 2 phone calls to get a meeting. We've got to call 2 different people to get somebody to show up for a meeting, and it takes 6 form fills to get that one call. It's dead easy. All you got to do is multiply those 3 numbers. And that's the reason I do it this way. I used to do it a bit more complicated, and I found this is the simplest way to do it. So then I just do 6 times 2 times 3, which is 36. So I need 36 on average, and you'll sometimes get a bit of pushback with this, but on average, I need 36 form fills in order to get one client. If my client is worth 8 grand profit, so I'm not thinking in terms of rev, I'm thinking in terms of profit. If they're worth 8 grand profit, and I need 36 of them on average, 36 form fills, leads, to get that one client, then as long as I don't spend more than $222 on each lead, then that's my break even. I wouldn't be losing any money. That'd be the fastest way to grow my practice, but I wouldn't be making any money. So then we're going to work down from that, at which point they might say to you, oh, okay, anything 150 or under is fine. Great. At least now we've got a starting point. But we're coming at this from understanding where our break-even point is rather than just, I don't know, $40 a lead? I think that sounds about good. Yeah, maybe 30. That isn't going to help you. And if a client does come to you and say, I need leads for 30, the first thing you need to understand, in order to understand how far to push the account or the ads that you're running, again, Google or Facebook or whatever you're running, you need to understand where that is in relation to the break-even point, because then you understand how much wiggle room you've got to play with. If these guys were already getting leads for $210 and we worked out the break-even was $222, oh, well, okay, let's stay there. In that case, if we can get leads a little bit cheaper, that might make sense. If we can get leads for $180 or $150, that makes a ton of sense. Obviously, we don't want to try and get leads for $10 because then there's no traffic available. We can't magically create loads of leads at $10. That's not a realistic expectation in a competitive world. But if the opposite is true, if we work out the break-even's $222 and the client is saying that our target is 40, that's an unrealistic expectation. Why? Because all your competitors probably have a break-even of roughly the same price, and if everybody else is sort of around 200 to 250, you can bet that some of them at least are going to be happy to accept leads at 150, 180. And if they're offering the machine $180 and you're offering the machine $40, who's going to get the traffic? So the target needs to be realistic, but you need to understand it in relation to the break-even so that you know which levers to pull inside the machine to point it in the right direction. And this is critical, that once we work out all of these numbers, we sort of soften it a little bit and say, look, this is just a starting point. We're going to revisit these assumptions probably on a quarterly basis. We're not going to revisit these every week, but let's come back and question this. Let's gather some data. Let's get enough so that we've got a trend, but it's not set in stone. It's not that we're going to have to get leads for $180 forevermore and we're never going to look at this again, because maybe we forgot to factor in phone calls, or maybe we get this other lead source and we need to split this out. There's all sorts of things that you might change later on. It's just a starting point and it will change over time. And generally that will help you get over the line with a client of, oh, okay, yeah, okay. As long as this isn't just set and forget forever. No. We're going to look at this. We'll come back to you. We'll suggest a new target and new numbers. Then that'll generally help your conversation. Okay, let's look at retail now. We've looked at lead com. let's now dig into retail. And the first thing I want to tackle with retail is what's the difference between ROAS and ROI. I know I've been guilty in the past of using the two interchangeably, and really they shouldn't be. ROAS is what we typically talk about as advertisers. This is typically where we start because it's an advertiser-centric metric. ROI, though, is a business-centric metric, and that's generally how our clients are going to be thinking. And the difference between the two can be quite large, as we'll see as we go through some examples. So ROAS is the revenue that your ads create divided by the cost of those ads. So very simple to work out, and if you're using Google Ads, that'll show us conversion value divided by cost. So conversion value over cost is the same as ROAS. If you're using Data Studio, you might want to rename that column because conversion value over cost can be a bit confusing for some clients, so you might want to just rename that to ROAS in Data Studio. ROI, or return on investment, did I even mention ROAS? Return on ad spend is what ROAS stands for. Sorry, too many acronyms. Actually, while we're on that, acronyms, we went through this as a team yesterday, and Trevor, our head of strategy, reminded the team where possible, and I know I'm doing it here, but where possible, don't use the 3 or 4 letter acronyms. Try and spell it out at least for the first few times in a conversation. Don't assume that they know what ROAS means or what AOV means. Spell it out, and rather than say COGS, say cost of goods sold. Now, when they start saying COGS, great. Now you're on the same page and you can use COGS as well, and you can match and mirror. But don't assume that they know what all of the funky acronyms mean. Clients hate it when we talk jargon and we talk in acronyms. So I'm doing it here because I know that you know, but when you're doing this with a client, particularly if they're fairly green, spell it out. So return on investment, ROI, is revenue minus your costs. In other words, profit over ad. And yes, times it by 100 to turn it into a percentage. I should have been consistent there and had the other one times 100. But if you want to turn it into a percentage, then just times this by 100. So this is profit compared to ad cost. So let's walk through an example. To keep the numbers simple, I'm going to assume a sale price of 100. I'm going to assume cost of goods sold, not COGS, COGS of $30. And I'm going to ignore overhead to keep this example simple. So we've got a gross profit of $70, or a gross profit margin of 70%. Now, I can't show this line by line on slides, so we'll look at the top line first. So we've got a cost of ads. We spent $10 on ads to generate $100 of revenue. So if you look at the ROAS column, the third column, revenue over ad cost, 100 divided by 10 is 10x. So our ROAS is 10x. Next line down, cost of ads is 20. So our ROAS is 100 divided by 20, or 5x. And on down the page, I think that column makes sense. Now let's look at ROI, the fourth column, and that's profit over ad cost. So if I've spent $10 on ads and my GP was 70, I got $60 profit, ignoring overhead for a minute. 60 divided by 10 is 6x. So my ROAS was 10, my ROI is 6, or 600%. Let's jump down a couple of lines to $35. If my cost of ads is $35, I had $70 of profit. That's now chopped in half. And so I've got 35 profit divided by 35 ad cost, which gives me 1, or 100%. So I've got 100% return on investment. It's way better than you're going to get at your high street bank. I've tipped in $35 and I've walked away with $35 profit after accounting for my costs. But if you're selling physical goods, that may not cut it. That might not be enough to make this profitable. So you might be reporting 3x ROAS and thinking, I'm a hero, I'm doing great. But your client might be looking at this and going, yeah, I'm not making any money here. We need to pull the pin. Now, if costs got higher, let's go to for the bottom line here, and we spent $70 to sell a $100 thing, we might be thinking, well, actually, we're doing okay. Now, if you're selling a digital product at this point, you're doing fine. But if you're selling a physical product, maybe not so much. So we had a gross profit of 70. We've spent all of that in order to get the sale. Our ROAS is still over 1, but our ROI is 0 now. We've spent $70 to make $70. We walk away making absolutely nothing. So that's our break-even point. Now I'm going to get a little bit funky and talk about returns and how returns factor in, particularly to ecom. So, got the graphic at the top just so we sort of understand visually what we're looking at here. And I'm going to say here that we've got 10 of our $100 sales. So my revenue for every example is going to stay as $1,000. And so across the top here, that's going to represent $1,000. Again, my cost of goods is 30%, so in this case, $300. And this time we're going to put some overhead in there and call that 20%. So over the course of 10 sales, we're going to call that $200. And we're going to spend $200 to make these sales. And we're going to keep that constant all the way through just to make this easy. So we've got a ROAS then of 5x. We've spent 200 to make 1,000, so our ROAS is 5. Now, let's add in some returns and some different return rates on the different lines. Now, I'm going to walk you through the example just so you understand where the numbers come from, but it's actually much simpler than it looks. If we have a 10% return rate, we sold $1,000 worth of stuff. 10% of that got returned, so we only have $900 in the till. So our effective revenue then is $900. If my return rate is 20%, $200 worth of stuff gets sent back. I've got $800 in the till. My effective revenue is $800. I should have done these columns a bit separately, but my effective ROAS then for the top line is 4.5. Now it's 900 over 200, or 4.5. Second line down, 800 over 200, or 4. So my ROAS then, let's take the second line, return rate of 20%. You can basically just take 20% off your ROAS to get your effective ROAS. What do I mean? I mean 5x minus 20% gives me 4x. Next line down, return rate of 30%. If I've got a ROAS of 5x and my return rate is 30%, I can just take 30% off of 5x. 10% of 5x is half, 0.5. 3 of those is 1.5. 5 minus 1.5 is 3.5. My daughter can do this math. You're okay. Have more coffee if you're left behind. It's 3.5. You're with me. Effective ROAS is 3.5x. And you can see how effective ROAS drops as the return rate goes up. Now let's look at the bit that your client is looking at and finish with this. This is the effective ROI. So my effective ROI, should be a plus sign after the 200 there. It's right. My cost is 500. My cost of goods sold and my overhead is $500 plus my $200 of ad cost. So my cost is 700. Now remember that my ROI is my profit. So I've got my effective revenue, not my total revenue because my revenue after returns, my effective revenue minus the cost. And that's the bit in brackets that you see on each line. Top line first, 900 minus 700. $900 effective revenue minus 700 cost. And that gives me 200 divided by 200 or 100%. Or a 1x return. So I've spent $200 to make a $200 profit. Okay, that's a 100% return on investment. Next line down, with a 20% return rate, and many retailers are getting 20% return rates these days. People like ASOS and Iconic, and probably beginning with Zappos, customers are used to used to buying 4 things and returning 3 of them or 2 of them, or buying a bunch of stuff, taking their Insta photos and sending the whole lot back. I was amazed how many trucks were on the road when I was in the UK recently, just trucks and white vans everywhere. All of this stuff going back and forth. It's incredibly inefficient. Amazon are probably going to solve that, we hope. Let's go third line down. 30% return rate, effective revenue of $700. My profit, therefore, is 0. I've got $700 worth of effective revenue, I've got $700 worth of cost, I've got 0 profit, and therefore a 0% return. But remember, we're reporting a ROAS in the account of 5. If we're taking returns into account, we might be talking about an effective ROAS of 3.5, but your client's looking at this and going, mate, I'm making no money. Can we stop now, please? And that's where you might get the email saying we need to pull the pin immediately without giving a 30 days notice, and that's when things can get a little bit interesting. And if we keep going down, I mean, hopefully you don't have a client, I know we don't, who has a return rate of 75%, but if you did, then there's bugger all effective revenue, you still have a high cost, and then your effective ROI is going backwards fast. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a better understanding of not just what to measure and how to optimize, but also how your client tends to think about this. And at a minimum, I hope this helps you have better conversations with your clients and maybe talk about stuff that's far more important to them instead of what we tend to do as advertisers, which is look at it from our side of the fence and use jargon. Please stop that one. And talk about what we can see from our side. Hopefully this helps you climb around the other side of the fence, stand in your client's shoes and understand this from their side of the fence. That'll lead to much better relationships and conversations. I'm Mike Rhodes from agencysavvy.com. If you'd love to join us, there's a few hundred very smart marketers who are having great conversations every day. We have a very, very active private Facebook group where we help each other with questions and answers. I'm in there every single day when I'm not traveling. And we also have a bunch of courses covering stuff like this, as well as Google Ads, Facebook Ads, Data Studio, Google Shopping, Google Analytics, and a whole bunch of stuff on running and growing your agency. So if you'd like to join us, dive over to agencysavvy.com and I'll see you there. Bye for now.